Number 1.
Robert Bob Levey, 83, was found dead on June 25, 2013, inside his Englewood home, which police said was set on fire. 8 years later, no arrests have been made. Investigators suspect foul play in the death of Levey, who lived in his home on Mimosa Drive for 30 years. A witness told police they saw another man setting his home on fire then leaving with gas cans. That's why investigators are spotlighting the case 8 years later, hoping new information comes forward. Just as recently as last week, part of the evidence that's been run through our partners at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we've resubmitted some evidence to them. I can't go into the specifics of that right now, said Detective Ray Reeves, with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit. Detectives said it was a brutal killing, but the cause of death was never released until now. An autopsy was performed by the medical examiner's office here in Duval County. They ruled the homicide by blunt force trauma, so we know he sustained multiple injuries and succumbed to those injuries and died as a result, said Reeves. The cold case unit is hoping for help from the community. Maybe they talked to someone, maybe they saw someone at the scene that night that may have said something, and they thought it's just trivial, but to us, it could be a crucial piece of evidence, a key piece that really breaks this case wide open, Reeves said. For Levey's family and friends, not a day has gone by without the hopes of bringing the killer to justice. Project Cold Case shared this statement with NEWS4 Jax from the family. He is dearly missed by his family and friends. We remain grateful for our caring community, the JSO, and their efforts to solve this case, the ongoing care and helpfulness of Project Cold Case and our local television stations for presenting this information. We are hopeful that someone will come forward with information that will help solve this case. A year after Levey's death, NEWS4 Jax spoke with his son, Russ Levey. There has not been an arrest made yet, and we feel we're holding out hope that someone knows something, Russ Levey said in 2014. That still holds true, no arrests have been made. Over the years there have been tips that have come in, and those have been followed up, said Reeves. The hope is spotlighting this cold case so a tipster can come forward. Over the years, there have been walks with mad dads, men against destruction defending against drugs and social disorder, vigils and memorials as the family struggles with Bob Levey's tragic death. Bob Levey would have turned 92 in November. Reeves said an arsonist could set fire to conceal or destroy evidence, but in this particular case, the fire did not completely consume the house, so investigators were able to gather evidence. The reward has been increased to $6,000 for a tip that leads to an arrest. To remain anonymous, call Crime Stoppers at 1-866-845-TIPS, 8477.
Number 2.
Sherry Lee Prather's body was in such bad shape when found in some woods off Braddock Road on November 14, 2012, that police couldn't even say if the remains were human. They were described as a batch of bones that appeared to be of several carcasses likely left by hunters. The 43-year-old Jacksonville woman had been killed and dumped there. Prather, of New Berlin Road, had been missing since October 10 of that year and was last seen at the Boots and Bottles nightclub on North Main Street in Ocean Way. A suspect all along was Johnny Wayne Johnson, with the pair seen on surveillance video leaving the bar on a motorcycle together. But investigators couldn't get enough evidence to take him into custody, and the death wasn't officially ruled a homicide until March 29, 2013, with the medical examiner's office determining she had been shot in the chest. Late Friday, detectives finally arrested Johnson, 42, of South Maiden Voyage Circle, and charged him with murder, according to the sheriff's office. At 12:30 a.m. the next day, a detective called Prather's mother to tell her Johnson was behind bars charged in her daughter's murder. Norma Ellis still lives in the home her daughter shared with her and says she can't even explain all the emotions she felt upon hearing the news, sadly asking why did he have to kill her? It brings back everything that I had tried to put behind me. I have lived with a broken heart, Ellis said. That really doesn't erase the hurt I still feel. I get up every morning and walk in her bedroom thinking it's a dream, and she is still in there. I can't put it past me. Johnson had been questioned before in Prather's disappearance after a witness said he confessed to killing her and dumping her body in the woods off Braddock Road, Lieutenant Steve Galler said. It led investigators to the body, but it wasn't until a second person stepped forward a day before the 4th anniversary of Prather's death with information that helped put it all together, Galler said. It's what made the case, he said. With a lot of these cases there's just things that people know, and we need them to come forward. This one took a lot longer than normal. But we have those that never get solved because people never come forward. The second person also told police that Johnson made statements regarding the dead woman, the lieutenant said. So Johnson was brought downtown Friday for another interview with detectives. During the 2012 interviews he said Prather did leave with him from the club on his motorcycle, but he dropped her off at a house on Trout River Boulevard, Galler said. Friday he initially said the same story, but then changed it up a few times, the lieutenant said. But he continued to deny he was responsible for her death. Galler said they have no motive yet as to why Prather was killed and wouldn't comment on other evidence in the case that led to the arrest. Prather's friends and family never gave up hope that someone would come forward with a tip that would lead to the case getting solved, recently posting emotional pleas on their Justice for Sherry Facebook page. We still want answers and justice. We will never stop till we get it. Johnson's previous Duval County arrest record is limited to an 11-month sentence in 1996 for burglary and a domestic violence injunction request filed against him this year by his ex-wife involving her daughters, according to court documents. All along, from day one, they said he did it, but they couldn't get enough on him, Ellis said. Her 2 daughters had lived with me until recently. I was afraid they might be in danger with him still out there.
Number 3.
A 19-year-old honors student goes to bed with a bright future to dream about, only to be murdered in her sleep. Ashleigh Love had just graduated high school with honors when a masked gunman stormed into her family's home. Her grieving parents will never be able to erase the nightmarish scene from their minds. Mom Tammy and Dad Joe found it difficult to talk about Ashleigh without breaking down when they told Crime Watch Daily of their heartbreak. Ashleigh Love held a special place in their hearts as the only girl among their 3 children. She was like a little mama to her little brother Alex, said Tammy Love. They say she was just about the nicest, good-natured kid any parent could hope to have. Even if she was like not having the greatest day, she was so funny, said Joey Clancy, Ashleigh's best friend since kindergarten. Ashleigh had also done her mom and dad proud as a quiet overachiever. She was very smart, but she didn't like to let anybody know that. But high school was a breeze for her, said Tammy. She was very shy that way. She didn't like anybody to make a big deal out of her. Even with the world at her feet, after finishing high school, Ashleigh happily took a job at a fast food restaurant near the family home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, while deciding what career to pursue. She really didn't know her options were open, said Tammy Love. And on the night she was murdered on October 6, 2009, Ashleigh had come home from work as usual and watched a Green Bay Packers football game with her family. She took her shower and then went to bed, said Tammy. The next thing Tammy remembers is suddenly being jolted from her sleep. I just specifically remember jumping out of my sleep, like, huh, said Tammy. But she didn't know what had woken her. And I'm looking at my alarm clock and it said 2 o'clock. 2 a.m., said Tammy. Now, thinking back, I really believe that's when she died. So then I get up and open the door up, and in front of me is standing this person with a gun. A big long gun. I'm like, oh my God. I thought we were being robbed. She had called my name, said Joe Love. And said check on Ashleigh, check on Ashleigh. Ashleigh was in the upstairs bedroom. And I'm like Ashleigh, Ashleigh, and I get up there and it's like, I couldn't really see that well, said Joe. Joe reeled back in horror at the sight of his beloved teenage daughter lying dead in her bed after being brutally shot point blank in the face. And all of a sudden I just see her face was just gone, said Joe. I just started screaming, who would do something like this? A distraught Tammy Love couldn't bring herself to look at her daughter's body. That would have made it real. To me, it wasn't real, said Tammy. Nobody in the house, including the Love's 2 sons, heard the gunshot that killed Ashleigh, fired by a masked intruder who'd broken into their house and then escaped through one of the doors. And Tammy thinks he may have had an accomplice with him. I heard something, like a flash. I could see like somebody else running, said Tammy. But police can't say if there may have been a second intruder. We recovered evidence, and some of the evidence we can't disclose at this time, but there is and has been evidence to the crime lab and back, said Milwaukee Police Det. Eric Villarreal. Milwaukee detectives had quickly discounted burglary as a motive after learning nothing was missing from the house. I think when you have a crime like this, you don't know for sure what their motive is until they explain it, said Milwaukee Police Det. Eric Gulbranson. It was 2 a.m. She was asleep, said Det. Villarreal. So you don't know what kind of interaction there was between her and the suspect, or if the suspect just came up there and shot her. But they suspect Ashleigh Love had been specifically targeted. If it's random, that would be scary, said Det. Villarreal. Tammy had described the gunman to detectives as a Hispanic male about 20 years old, of average height and build. He had short, spiked black hair, wearing a dark zippered sweater or jacket, said Villarreal. And police scoured Ashleigh's social media accounts looking for anyone who matched that description. They were all thoroughly reviewed, and nothing that led us to a suspect, said Villarreal. None of Ashleigh's friends appeared to be a suspect either. We have talked to everybody we're aware of that she socialized with, interviewed them. We've obtained their background information, said Det. Gulbranson. But detectives would get reports that Ashleigh Love had been seen secretly meeting with a mystery man on several occasions before her murder. And it appeared to the people that saw those two interact that she didn't want other people to know she was meeting with this person, kind of like a secret friend or acquaintance of some sort, a detective said in a joint press conference with Ashleigh's family in an effort to find the so-called mystery man. Right now we just need to talk to him to find out what he can tell us about his involvement with Ashleigh. Ashleigh's anguished parents plead with him to come forward. Lifelong friend Joey Clancy is surprised Ashleigh didn't confide in her if she had a secret boyfriend. They talk about people with double lives and stuff, but Ashleigh was like way too honest to have a double life, said Joey Clancy. There were also reports Ashleigh had been seen getting into a blue pickup truck with an unidentified man in the months before her murder, but investigators couldn't confirm them. We were unable to identify that particular truck or someone that would admit to being that person that picked her up, said Det. Gulbranson. And they're still no closer to finding Ashleigh Love's killer than they were when she was murdered 7 years ago. And that is what is hard and frustrating for us, said Det. Villarreal. But Ashleigh's mom refuses to give up hope, visiting her daughter's grave every day and vowing to keep visiting it until her murderer is brought to justice. Years have passed, and Ashleigh's murder remains unsolved. It is believed that certain people learned who killed Ashleigh at some point after the fact, and Ashleigh's family members are hoping that these people will come forward. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact the Milwaukee Police Cold Case Hotline at 414-935-1212.
Number 4.
The jury found Christopher McLawhorn guilty on all charges Thursday in the stabbing death of Tiffany Ferguson, an Asheville nurse who was killed inside her home. The charges include first-degree murder and first-degree premeditated murder. The jury began deliberations on Thursday afternoon. The accused killer McLawhorn waived his right to testify shortly before the court broke for lunch on Thursday. Closing arguments began after the lunch break, and the jury got the case by mid-afternoon. The verdict came in around 4:50 p.m. Metro Nashville Police Detective Chad Gish testified on Thursday morning how McLawhorn's phone activity connected him to the murder of Tiffany Ferguson inside her condo near Wedgwood Avenue in South Nashville. Gish forensically analyzed the phone and found several incriminating Google searches. Following the stabbing, Gish testified McLawhorn searched Nashville stabbing and clicked on several local news station articles about Ferguson's murder. Gish also testified McLawhorn also searched "Does rain wash away fingerprints?" He said following the stabbing that McLawhorn also looked up murder erotica pornography. Gish said he also searched for a pawn shop that was near the scene of the crime. He said McLawhorn sold Ferguson's roommate's ring that he had stolen the morning of the murder at that pawn shop. The jury will begin deliberations after closing arguments and could have a verdict this afternoon. On Wednesday, the testimony centered around DNA samples recovered from Ferguson's roommates and anyone else who spent time in the victim's apartment. Police said Christopher McLawhorn walked into the apartment in the middle of the night intending to pull off a robbery. Instead, he stabbed Ferguson to death. A Metro Police detective took to the stand on Wednesday morning outlining how they went about finding any potential suspects, including taking DNA samples and photos. During the course of the investigation, we realized they'd be in close proximity, winter months. It's human nature to defend yourself, testified Metro Police Det. Anthony Chandler. It's possible injuries are not seen to the naked eye, not on the facial area. The cellmate of the man accused of killing an Asheville Nurse Insider condo testified on Tuesday, the second day of the trial. David Falk took the stand and said that Christopher McLawhorn confessed to him that he killed Tiffany Ferguson. During testimony, he gave graphic details of what McLawhorn told him during their time in jail together, including how and where he stabbed Ferguson, and that he only got away with one piece of jewelry from her apartment, a ring that he pawned for $300. Falk also testified that McLawhorn was obsessed with the news coverage of what he had done. He liked the coverage and would go watch the coverage on TV, Falk testified. He said one picture was better than the other and didn't like one of the pictures. He would come back every time the news was on to see the media coverage on it. On Monday, the woman's roommate and twin sister took the stand, as well as a slew of Metro Police officers working the case. The jury also heard from the man who last saw Ferguson alive and what happened in the moments before her death. McLawhorn, a homeless man, is accused of killing Ferguson, as well as stealing her purse and laptop. He's been charged with first-degree murder and premeditated murder. Police said McLawhorn walked into the 23-year-old's Wedgwood Avenue condo to rob her, and he ended up killing her in February 2017. "The first thing that woke me up was a scream that morning," said Melissa Thornley, tearfully recounting the moment she found her roommate stabbed in her bed. "I jumped up out of my bed and grabbed my phone and my glasses and I ran out of my bedroom door and I saw the front door was open. I locked the door and just started screaming for Tiffany, yelling her name," Thornley said. "I ran back into her room. She was laying in her bed. Her mouth was open, there was blood. Ferguson was stabbed 9 times. She did not survive the attack. I did chest compressions." The 911 operator stayed on the phone. "They told me to keep counting," said Thornley, who desperately tried to save her roommate, a friend she's known since college. "She had one short breath at one point, but that was all. It all happened after a night out drinking with friends. A crime of opportunity," police said, since her apartment door was found unlocked. A co-worker who was out with Tiffany that night said the two of them had returned to her apartment and fooled around a bit. "Things just between us were getting awkward and decided to talk about it later," said Michael Sanborn, the last person to see Tiffany alive. "I live down the street, so we decided I'd go home." Sanborn said he didn't try to lock the door on the way out of Ferguson's apartment that night, but agreed not figuring out how is something that's haunted him. Police quickly ruled out Sanborn as a suspect. "I figured I was one of the last ones to see her, and so I needed to go police what I knew," he said in court. While they knew Sanborn was innocent, police had a lot of work ahead of them before they identified McLawhorn as a suspect. Officers that worked the case also testified in court on Monday. An early motive for Tiffany's murder was robbery. Police discovered both her purse and computer were missing from the scene along with something else, the murder weapon. "The knife was missing out of the block," said Tiffany's roommate, Melissa Thornley. Tiffany's purse was found by the side of the apartment building on the end of the street. At the same time police were interviewing Thornley, another crime was happening right in the same neighborhood. "We were told that a white male was in the area of 8th Avenue South and Wedgwood breaking into vehicles," said Sergeant Stephen Weiser. Police say they found a trail of evidence leading to McLawhorn. Crime scene investigators found fingerprints in the dust on the top of Tiffany's headboard and recovered a hat and a footprint in a wooded area near the interstate, a hat McLawhorn seen wearing in old photos. Tiffany's purse was found outside in the rain along with her laptop with a knife inside. McLawhorn watched and followed along through hours of emotional testimony on Monday, showing little emotion of his own as he faces charges in the murder of Tiffany Ferguson. Late on Monday, just before the jury went home for the day, McLawhorn's cellmate took the stand. "At first he's like, she started screaming," the man recalled to the court. "He got scared and by time it was over, stabbed her."
Number 5.
Stacy Dillon was only 22 years old when he was found murdered inside his mother's Cleveland, Tennessee home on March 17, 1991. Stacy's mother Judy Dillon had gotten knee surgery in the weeks before Stacy's death, and she was bedridden as a result. Stacy had been taking care of his mother during her recovery, but just days before Stacy was murdered, Judy decided to stay with a friend for the weekend in order to give her son a break from being her caretaker. On the evening of March 17, 1991, Judy's friend drove her back home. When they arrived, Judy's friend knocked on the door to see if Stacy could help bring Judy back into the house. His knocks went unanswered, so he decided to use the spare key to get inside. Upon opening the door, he discovered something horrific. Stacy was dead on the hallway floor. He had suffered a single bullet wound to the cheek. The family's landline phone was found just inches away from Stacy's body. Police were immediately called, and it did not take long for Stacy's death to be ruled a homicide. Despite this ruling, there were still many unanswered questions. A murder weapon was never found, and the medical examiner never conducted an autopsy on Stacy's body. Investigators did have a few leads, though. It was learned that Stacy was on the phone shortly before his death, hence the phone found inches away from Stacy's body. It was later revealed that Stacy was on the phone with a friend named Jeff Brewer. He reportedly told Jeff that he was worried about something and needed advice. However, before Stacy could elaborate, a car pulled into the driveway of Stacy's home. Not much else has been revealed about what Jeff might have potentially heard during the phone call, and Jeff has since passed away. The case went cold seemingly fast. Police took another look at it during the early 2000s, but nothing ever came of it. Judy Dillon stated that she eventually came to acceptance with the fact that her son's case remained unsolved. She felt the police had botched the investigation. It would be years before the case would finally be reignited. Finally, in 2011, the case was reopened with a new team of detectives. From that investigation, it was revealed that Stacy reportedly had to keep parts of his life a secret from his extremely conservative hometown. In fact, investigators stated that they believe Stacy's murder was personal, potentially committed by a male with whom Stacy was in a relationship. There was no sign of forced entry at the Dillon home, which suggests that Stacy was killed by a person he knew. This theory was also investigated in the initial stages of the case, particularly the aspect that Stacy might have been involved in a secret relationship with a male, but Judy Dillon denied, and still denies, that her son was gay. This theory was revisited when Stacy's case was reopened in 2011. Investigators were also able to identify a person of interest. He happened to be the same person of interest who had been questioned by police 20 years earlier. Said person has never been publicly identified. Detectives working the case after it was reopened also noted that there was mention of a confidential informant named Becky in the previous files on Stacy's murder. Becky reportedly saw one of the suspects on the night of the murder. At this time, the new investigators are unaware of Becky's true identity, but they are hoping to identify her and speak with her. Stacy's murder remains unsolved today. The Cleveland, Tennessee Police Department is investigating. If you have any information about the case, please contact investigators at 423-476-7511.
Number 6.
Jill Behrman vanished at the age of 19 on May 31, 2000. At the time, Jill was a student at Indiana University. On the day she vanished, Jill went for a bike ride in Bloomington and never returned home. Her family members were immediately worried and reported her missing very shortly thereafter. Just 2 days later, Jill's bicycle was found in a field north of town. From that point forward, it was believed that Jill had met with foul play. This sparked an extensive search for the young woman. Unfortunately, the searches for Jill initially came up empty. Almost a year passed without any progress in the case. Then, in 2001, a woman named Wendy Owings came forward and stated she was in the car with another woman named Alicia Souders and a man named Uriah Klaus when they hit Jill while driving around under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Wendy told authorities that Jill was not dead after she was hit, but they believed she significantly injured, so the women decided to kill her. Wendy claimed they dumped Jill's body in a creek and then abandoned her bicycle on the other side of town. This confession seemed promising at first, as one of the three women lived nearby the location where Jill's bicycle was found. Wendy's confession sparked yet another extensive search for Jill in the area where Wendy claimed she was dumped, but unfortunately nothing was found. Still, detectives continued to investigate this lead, while prosecutors were considering pressing charges without a body. However, the case would soon take a few unexpected turns. On March 9, 2003, almost 2 years after Jill's disappearance, human remains were found in a remote area in Morgan County. Just days later, those remains were confirmed to be that of Jill Behrman. She was not found in the creek, where Wendy claimed she had been dumped. An autopsy also revealed that Jill's injuries were not consistent with being struck by a vehicle. In fact, Jill had died of a gunshot wound to the back of her head. At that point, Wendy changed her story and denied her involvement in Jill's death. She was already incarcerated for an unrelated charge at the time she made the confession about Jill's death, so it was believed that Wendy was coerced into a false confession. She and Alicia were cleared of suspicion. However, Uriah Klaus remained a suspect. Klaus continuously denied his involvement in Jill's death, and eventually investigators closed in on another suspect, John Robert Myers. Myers had reportedly made incriminating statements about the case to his friends and family members. In March 2006, a grand jury began an investigation into Jill's disappearance and death. About a month later, on April 9, 2006, Myers was arrested and charged with Jill's murder. Little information was revealed about any direct evidence that linked Myers to the crime, and he pleaded not guilty to the charges. In October 2006, Myers went to trial and was ultimately found guilty of Jill's murder. He was sentenced to 65 years in prison. Myers continued to deny his guilt after his conviction. Years later, in September 2019, a district court judge in Indianapolis took another look at the case and ultimately decided to vacate the murder conviction against Myers. The decision came after it was deemed that Myers received ineffective assistance of counsel during his trial, which is a violation of Sixth Amendment rights. It was also determined that Myers' attorneys made inaccurate statements to the jury during opening statements. After years of thinking justice had been served, Jill Behrman's family is back at square one. Jill's mother still believes Myers is responsible and hopes that the state will decide to retrial him. In September 2019, U.S. District Judge James Sweeney vacated Myers' conviction and ordered his release from prison. He ruled that Myers' legal representation during his murder trial was so ineffective that his Sixth Amendment rights had been violated. But in August 2020, a three-judge panel of the Chicago-based U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals reversed Sweeney's order, ruling that jurors still would have convicted Myers even without the errors by his counsel. Because of the strength of the evidence presented at trial, our confidence in the jury's decision is not undermined, that ruling states.
Number 7.
The Shorts were known as a nice, average family. Michael, 50, and his wife Mary, 36, owned a mobile home moving business and were raising their daughter Jennifer, 9, in Bassett, Virginia. The trio was described as a private but happy family. According to acquaintances, the Short family tended to be on the quieter side, and they were not known to cause drama. Due to all of this, community was incredibly shocked when Michael and Mary were found shot to death at their home on the evening of August 15, 2002. The police were called that evening after a co-worker who drove by the Shorts' home spotted Michael laying in a pool of his blood inside their enclosed carport. When police arrived on the scene, they found Mary shot to death in the couple's bedroom. Their daughter, Jennifer, was nowhere to be found. An Amber Alert was issued, and a search for the young girl quickly ensued. All of the searches by professional search teams unfortunately came up empty. Then, over a month later, on September 26, 2002, a gruesome discovery was made. A man's dogs found human remains in a creek in Rockingham County, North Carolina. The remains were located approximately 35 miles away from the Shorts' home in Virginia. The remains were sent to the lab for forensic testing and were later confirmed to be that of Jennifer Short. She had also been shot in the head. It was clear at this point that the Short family had been executed, but so many questions remain, such as, who would want the Short family dead? Why was Jennifer taken to a different location? Was she held captive for a period of time before she was killed? Perhaps the most haunting question, though, is the motive. Why did someone kill this entire family? Over 15 years have passed since the Short family murders, and investigators are still baffled and haunted by the unsolved case. Even the experienced investigators working the case have acknowledged that it is quite unusual, which is perhaps why it is so haunting. In October 2018, the world was captivated by the disappearance of 13-year-old Jane Kloss, who went missing from her Behrman, Wisconsin home after her parents were shot to death by an intruder. Much like the Short case, the investigators working the Kloss case were baffled by the murders of James and Denise Kloss and the disappearance of their daughter, and on numerous occasions they also acknowledged that this type of case is very unusual. The world was even more blown away in January 2019 when Jane was fortunately found alive. She had been held captive by 21-year-old Jake Patterson at his home in Gordon, Wisconsin. After 88 days of captivity, Jane was bravely able to escape while Patterson was out of the house. Patterson was arrested shortly thereafter and is currently serving a life sentence for killing James' parents and kidnapping her. Once the news about the murders of James and Denise Kloss and the disappearance of their daughter began to spread, many comparisons were made between the Kloss case and the Short case. As weeks turned into months without any sign of Jane, many began to fear that she suffered the same fate as Jennifer Short and would be found under similar circumstances. Statistically, children who are kidnapped and ultimately murdered are usually dead within the first 3 hours. Since Jennifer was ultimately found murdered, it is a high possibility that she was killed within 3 hours of being taken from her home on August 15, 2002. If Jane, too, had been murdered, it would also be a high possibility that she would have been killed within the first 3 hours of being taken from her home. However, Jane's case ultimately does not fall under the same statistical category as Jennifer's, as she did not end up being murdered. Jane's case is similarly quite rare, though. According to the Polly Klaas Foundation, only about 100 children, a fraction of 1%, are kidnapped each year in a stranger abduction. Only about half of these children are found alive. Children who are missing for longer periods of time are also less likely to be found, which also makes Jane's case unique. Unlike the Kloss case, the Short family case does not appear any closer to being solved. Many leads have been followed over the years, yet no arrests have been made, and no suspects have been publicly identified. The Bassett community is still haunted by case, and investigators are hoping to bring the family to justice. There is a $100,000 reward in place for anyone with information that could lead to the arrest of the persons responsible for the deaths of Michael, Mary, and Jennifer. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact the Henry County Sheriff's Office at 276-656-4200.